Welcome to Backyard Cigars. Today I'm holding something of a relic as well. I've kind of been in this relic kind of vibe, kind of trend where I'm really just kind of tasting a lot of different things, especially older things from the past, because I want to get in touch with the history that I've read about. And one way of connecting to it is obviously smoking some of the past cigars that have been made, so the ones that you can smoke, and whether or not they offer the world to you or not, that can be debated, and there are different ways of looking at it. But generally speaking, I like it because of my love of history and especially cigar history. So I kind of look at it as an opportunity to kind of sometimes fit certain pieces of the puzzle, uh, because there are things that you may have read and heard, like in anything, right? You read things, you hear things, but until you experience it, you don't really know. And then that's the difference. This cigar is a Cohiba from 1981. Now, this is a General Cigar brand Cohiba dating back to 1981. We're going to talk about this history. We're going to see how the cigar performs all of these years later, and stay tuned. So, here we have a close up of the cigar, and it has a slight box press. If you can see that the cap is a bit bent out of shape there, a little disfigured, deformed. The Cohiba, and then right underneath it says República Dominicana, and there's the foot of the cigar. Looks pretty good. Looks well maintained, I would say. And as you can see here, we have the cellophane. And it was pretty yellowed, but still in very good condition. Still, it did not tear easily. It was fine. I wasn't able to get the band off in order to do my rinsing, so I rinsed it with the band on, and nothing really much came out of it except maybe a little discoloration there. But I had to do it. I felt the wrapper really needed a little hydration, and I've given it a little pat down and dry down, and here we go. And here we go. So I just want everyone to know that this cigar was graciously contributed by Georgia Vintage Cigar Store, and it is much appreciated. But all cigars that are sent over to Backyard Cigars are all treated equally and given a fair review regardless. So that much I can say. The track record has been pretty good with cigars that I've gotten, and then I really haven't had anything bad, So I think there was one El Producto that I haven't reviewed yet, and I've been meaning to, that I wasn't that blown away by. I thought it was really rather dry and not as pleasing or as creamy as I wanted it to be. But I didn't think it was horrible. I just felt like time had really exhausted whatever it was once affording the cigar consumer. So I think at that point, it was just too much time had passed. But you have different years of El Producto, so there are obviously different. And the second El Producto that I do have, I'm going to review and definitely take some mental notes, but share with you just what I thought of it. Now, this is what I'm smoking now. One of the very first Dominican Cohibas that were introduced to the cigar market back in 1981. I mean, Cohiba. That's a brand name that everyone is aware of, and I just want to take a moment and just read a few words. Cohiba is the Taino word for tobacco. And the brand that even non-cigar smokers seem to know. The brand was created in 1966 as a limited production private brand supplied exclusively to Fidel Castro and high-level officials in the Communist Party of Cuba. Okay, let me rewind a little bit for you. Cohiba is originally a Cuban brand. The cigar I have in my hand is a Cohiba from the Dominican Republic. And I know that a lot of us are familiar with the fact that there are two Partagas, two Cohibas, two Punches, and so on. Of a lot of original Cuban brands, we have cigars being made using Nicaraguan and Dominican tobaccos. And some people, especially early smokers, newbies, are a little confused as to that. They'll go to a store and they'll probably find a Monte Cristo and they'll go home thinking they just bought a Cuban Monte Cristo and they don't know how the hell that happened. They knew that it shouldn't be possible because Monte Cristos are illegal, at least Cuban ones are illegal to purchase in the United States, but you can buy the Dominican or the Nicaraguan version of some of these brands. And in the case of the Partagas Clásico in specific, it's blended with a few other nations tobacco, so it's not just Dominican tobacco or Connecticut broadleaf. I believe there might be a few other tobaccos in there, but I digress. My point is, some of you think, wow, what's the deal with the two Cohibas, the two Partagas, and all of that? What's the deal with all of that? Well, as I mentioned, Cohiba was a brand created in 1966 as a limited production private brand supplied exclusively to Fidel Castro and high-level officials in the Communist Party of Cuba. Often given as a gift to diplomats, it was first released commercially for sale in 1982. The story of Eduardo Rivera is one Castro told many times, and that was Eduardo Rivera, the man who created the blend behind Cohiba that Castro fell in love with. But the truth is that it has been a controversial brand and one that has been banned in the grand old USA. Nonetheless, it remains an iconic brand, but after the 1962 embargo placed on Cuba and its cigars by the United States, it has been hard to find for American smokers and has been counterfeited more than any cigar in the history of cigars. But Castro's takeover of the Cuban cigar industry created an opportunity for a certain American cigar giant to move in and capitalize on certain brands. Was this the right thing to do? Was it even legal? Well, the matter went to the courts and it took years for a judgment. Even till today, the issue remains in dispute despite court rulings. Edgar Coleman Sr. and a group of investors purchased General Cigars in 1961 for $25 million. General Cigars, under Edgar Coleman Sr., pioneered the trend of aging the cigar's wrapper when very few were doing so. The aging made the tobacco sweeter, and that appealed to the American palate. In the case of Partagas, which was originally a Cuban brand. General Cigars purchased the brand from family owner Ramon Cifuentes in 1974. Ramon had become an employee of General Cigars in either 63 or 1964. Ramon worked with Ben Menendez. Edgar Coleman placed his bet that he would purchase the Partagas brand and that the embargo on Cuba would not be lifted anytime soon. Others within the company feared that purchasing the brand would endanger any potential business that General Cigar could have with Cuba in the future. This was the very first purchase of an original Cuban brand, the Partagas purchase. It was rumored that Consolidated Cigar had a relationship with Monte Cristo before Partagas was sold to General Cigars. In the case of Cohiba, General Cigars did not purchase the brand, but instead registered the brand in February of 1981. It was rumored they actually did this as early as 1978. Maybe they applied in 78 and got approval in 1981, and began marketing in a limited fashion. In 1994, the General Cigars Cohiba was still very limited and only available at certain shops, and plans for the brand were shaky. General Cigars had paltry sales of their Cohiba brand in the 1980s. In 1992, General Cigar decided to try once more and reintroduce the brand as Red Dot Cohiba. Underlying sweetness to the tobacco, general earthiness. Slightly smooth, slightly creamy. Developing. Let's go back to 2004, where federal judge Robert W. Sweet Jr. ruled in favor of Cubatabaco, the Cuban cigar company, in a trademark dispute over the U.S. rights to Cohiba, the cigar brand that became known as Fidel Castro's favorite. In a 142-page decision released in 2004, Judge Sweet recognized the Cuban Cohiba as a well-known mark entitled to special international protection. Judge Sweet went further in saying that Cubatabaco was entitled to an injunction prohibiting General Cigar from continuing to sell the cigars under the Cohiba name. He also ordered the cancellation of the registration filed by General Cigar. The court concluded that the trial to quantify the monetary relief to which Cubatabaco is entitled is warranted in the future. Under the ruling, the Cuban company will be able to export its Cohiba cigars to the USA once the embargo is lifted. On July 14th, 2010, the battle continued, and in a Manhattan appeals court, it ruled in favor of General Cigar Company in its 13-year fight with Cuba over the Cohiba brand. Circuit judges Rena Raggi and Gerard E. Lynch, along with Danny Chin, all stated that Cubatabaco's claim was without merit. This battle between the two began in 1997 when Cubatabaco sued General Cigar and attempted to cancel General's trademark. It's getting pretty nasty. And to date, it's probably still one of the nastiest battles that we've seen in cigar history. It really is. And it's one that I don't think will end anytime soon regardless. But in 2013, a federal panel says General Cigar can continue using the Cohiba trademark on its cigars in the U.S. The ruling is the latest in the nearly 16-year legal battle with Cohiba's state-run cigar company. The Richmond, Virginia-based subsidiary of Swedish Match AB said that U.S. Trademark Trial and Appeal Board dismissed Cubatabaco's petition asking to cancel the company's trademark. In 2014, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Federal Circuit ruled in favor of the Cuban company by giving its standing to seek a cancellation of the registrations that block its own ability to register trademarks. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court handed Cuba a victory. It declined to intervene in the matter by refusing to hear an appeal. It left intact a ruling favoring Cuba. General Cigars can only sell Cohiba in the USA. So there we are. And Wikipedia provided a few additional bits of information. And here it says, in response to General Cigar's use of the Cohiba name, Cubatabaco, the government-run company in charge of cigars and half-owner of Habanos S.A., along with Altaldis S.A., launched a long-running legal campaign to have General Cigar's trademark revoked. These legal fisticuffs were resolved on June 19, 2006, when the U.S. Supreme Court denied Cubatabaco's petition. As a result, the February 2005 decision of the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which confirmed General Cigar Company's exclusive ownership of the Cohiba trademark in the United States, is final. The General Cigar made Cohiba cigars now have a disclaimer on boxes that they are not affiliated in any way with the Cuban brand. However, the United States government, in a brief filed in the Supreme Court, acknowledged that Cubatabaco could request U.S. government permission for judicial protection of a brand from the Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. Pulling out all the stops. Which administers the U.S. embargo. Cubatabaco has stated that they intend to pursue this course of action. And so, you have these legal proceedings that have continued over the course of the better part of 20 years. There's a lot of bad blood. So when I'm smoking this cigar, I'm thinking to myself, 1981. You know, it was an uncertain time for cigar makers. It was a point in time when General Cigars itself was really not the giant that I described it to be. It was a big company and it had capital, but it wasn't the giant that it would become much later. I mean, once it acquired Paltagas, that really helped it take off quite a bit. And the addition of Cohiba, although it took a lot longer than they planned, eventually paid off for them. And throughout the course of history, there's been the debate of, are they right in doing this? Are they, you know, I mean, the Paltagas situation was different, right? Because Ramon Cifuentes owned that brand. And even though it was taken from him in Cuba, and you still have the Cuban Paltagas, you know, there was this identity to the brand with Ramon Cifuentes. And he took his talents elsewhere and decided to sell the brand, which was rightfully his, belonged to his family. So it was different when you say, well, you have a cigar named Cohiba, but it's, you know, not available due to an embargo. So we're going to put out our own version using Dominican tobacco. And we're going to do the dots on it just like you, same color scheme. You know, it's going to look like a Cuban Cohiba in a lot of ways. And it's good enough that a lot of people will just accept it. And that was where they were wrong. Because it was not accepted, not the way that they had envisioned. And it just, it was seen as a knockoff. And we're going to take a look at that. You know, the way that smokers were looking at this cigar in 1981 is not the way that obviously I'm looking at it now, because now it's a part of history. Now in this article, in the Lakeland Ledger, November 8th, 1997, Cuba fumes over copycat Cohiba cigar. And a list of different officials from within Habanos S.A. are being quoted, and they all have different things to say. It's from the cigar is a fraud to taking a shot at the fact that it's using Dominican tobacco. There's the word copycat is thrown around, and anger is being displayed by a lot of officials within the Cuban government in regards to this issue. There is one thing towards the bottom that's rather interesting. And the bottom line is that this does run counter to fairness, said Pamela S. Falk, author of the book Cuban Foreign Policy and professor of international trade and commercial transactions at the City University of New York School of Law. According to international treaties, she says, you can't take a name that is famous and has been commercially marketed and claim it as your own. On the other hand, she added, the fundamental issue in terms of the law is registration. So it is very unlikely the Cubans can win this one, since they inexplicably failed to register in the United States a trademark they had registered in all sorts of other countries. What do we have there? What do we have there? I'll tell you what we have there. We have there a situation where I beat you to the punch and you don't think it's right. But hey, concessions have been made. The brand by General Cigars can only be sold in the US of A. Okay? So you have that limitation. You have the disclaimer that's in the box now. And the change of design, which has happened over the course of the years. Doesn't look like this anymore, obviously. And I think a rededication to the quality of the current Cohiba cigars from General Cigars. I think the quality has gotten better. And they're expensive cigars, $20 sometimes for some of these cigars. But they're very good cigars. This cigar right now, mild, slightly creamy, slightly dry, a little bit of hay in the back, just a little. General earthiness, not much else. I'm not sure if this was a Cameroon wrapper or if this was an Indonesian Sumatran wrapper that they used in 1981. But the filler is Dominican and the binder is Dominican. So we have that. And as I mentioned in the article, it's a clear case of, perhaps it may run against being fair. It may maybe not as fair as we would like it to be, but technically, legally, they have something to stand on. Here we have an article from the day, February 28, 1998. Castro seeks assistance from the U.S. in protecting trademark for cigar. And it basically states here that the Cuban government is feuding with General Cigars in the U.S. market, and that Cuba asked the Treasury Department for permission to file a lawsuit. Permission required by the U.S. embargo law was granted. 1 month later, Cubatabaco asked the New York Federal Court to remove General Cigars Cohiba from the market. These can be sold only in the United States because Cuba controls the Cohiba brand name in other countries. But the matter is likely to be settled privately. Both parties have told the court they want to negotiate an agreement. Neither will say how talks are going because of the travel restrictions between the countries. Cuban and American tobacco executives most recently met in Mexico City to strike a deal. They will meet again at an undisclosed location. Now, another thing that I failed to tell you was that not only did General Cigar file that or register that brand before Cubatabaco did, but also Cubatabaco had filed that same registration in many other countries. Simply dropped the ball on the United States and didn't file it there. This is from The Hour, May 5th, 2006. Cigar makers smoking mad over counterfeits. And we'll have here the mention of many Cuban cigar brands, including Montecristo, Julieta, Romeo Julieta, H. Upmann, and New York-based General Cigar Company holds the rights to Cohiba, Paltagas, Macanudo, and other premium brands. That They go on to state that means anyone who uses those brands to market a cigar as made in Havana or as a Cuban replica is either violating the U.S. embargo against Cuba or the trademark rights of Altadis, General Cigar, and other companies. Altadis USA, which has 7,800 employees and had 2005 revenue of about 700 million, has been leading the charge against counterfeiters using its own private investigators to assist the police. And it goes on to state just how these brands are just, the fact that there are two of the brand, one from Cuba, one from the United States, is kind of opening the doors for more counterfeiting. So does that mean that these cigars may have been counterfeited as well? Possibly, but highly doubt it, because I just don't see them going to that effort. And you know what, as a matter of fact, George, when we spoke about this cigar, he mentioned to me about how he got in contact with someone from General Cigars, and they told him the same thing, that they sincerely doubted that anyone would have gone to those lengths to counterfeit this cigar. It just wasn't that sought after. It wasn't desired in that way for people to make counterfeits of this cigar. But I remember there were times that people would say, oh yeah, they got the fake Cohiba. You could buy the fake Cohiba. What do you mean the fake Cohiba? Yeah, you can buy the fake Cohiba. They make it in the Dominican Republic. You can buy that one. But they were calling it the fake Cohiba. I mean, that's how I always knew about it. Until finally I realized that, wait a minute, this isn't the fake Cohiba. This is Cohiba from the United States, from General Cigars, and the fake Cohibas would probably be those Cuban rounds type of cigars that you see around. Maybe you could consider those the fake Cohibas. Maybe if you want, you could still consider this the fake Cohiba, because it did something that, while maybe not the most ethical thing in some people's eyes, was still sneaky, smart, shrewd, and it took a deep jab at one of our adversaries, and certainly one that is still an open wound to this day. Lots of cream, smooth, some mild sweetness, dry hay in the finish. And the cigar 1981, talking over 40 years, right? So I mean, sometimes for me, I feel like it was just right around the corner, but it was nearly 40 years ago. So you take that into account, that the cigar has been pretty well maintained over the course of 40 years, and for what it's smoking right now, I think it's a decent smoke, decent vintage smoke. Really pleasant, slightly chewy smoke. The body is good on this. Is a nice medium body on it. I would call it medium strength, or mild to medium. Right at that cusp where you feel like it could be a medium, but it's more mild, but full of flavor. Can't compare these smokes to the Cohibas of today, I would say, because the Cohibas of today, I mean, at least the last ones that I've smoked have been really good, aged really well. If you put them down for a year or 2 or 3, if you want to do that, if you want to treat it like a Cuban. But seriously, it's burning more or less evenly. I mean, it's a little, just a tad bit wonky there, but nothing serious. And it really hasn't given me any issues on the draw. This is slightly box pressed, either a torpedo belicoso, and probably measuring somewhere between 5.5 with I'm gonna take a guess and say a 50 ring gauge. Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't really think that most Dominican tobacco ages really well, and that's just my opinion, from my experiences. But um, it is incredibly smooth, and it does have that creaminess that course of time, I guess, has given it. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you all for joining me on another episode of Backyard Cigars, where we traveled back in time to try something that has really been doing the legal juggle for nearly 20 years. And as time has gone by, over 20 years probably, yeah, as time has gone by, the attitude towards the brand has changed. And the actual original brand, Cohiba, has experienced its own issues in regards to quality and construction as well. So you have that. And I want to thank you all again for watching this review of a Dominican-made Cohiba from 1981. Thank you very much. Till next time on Backyard Cigars.